Today we're going to be following the course of the old Harbour branch from the original Aberystwyth station down to the, you guessed it, the harbour. If you haven't seen it yet, a couple of weeks ago we put a video out on the history and evolution of the Vale of Rheidol Railway's Aberystwyth Termini. So if you haven't seen it, the link's in the description. Go watch that now so you get the background, and then come back here and tune into this one, because this is a bit like a part 2 where we explore this area further. Like we saw last time, this is the site of the original loco depot at Aberystwyth. There was a fitter's workshop, a second workshop behind it, and the actual running shed on this side, quite close to the river. And the harbour branch went along behind these workshops and sheds and headed down this way towards Trefechan. And we're going to head down there now and follow the route of that original part of the railway. When the railway first opened, or well, actually before the railway was open, when it was first built, the initial section to be constructed was the harbour branch, because the rails had to be imported from Bristol and other places where Pevick Brothers, the contractors, got their second-hand rails from. So the rails were started from the quayside in Aberystwyth and extended from there up to Devil's Bridge. The first section was not the main line, but this branch that would be serving not only the railway supplies coming in by sea, but also the exports of the mines in the valley and the timber from around Devil's Bridge, a way of getting the stuff from the station at Aberystwyth down to the quayside to load onto ships. Lead, zinc, copper, silver and pyrite as well was exported to Ireland, Belgium and other places on the continent and other parts of the UK. So access to the ships was absolutely vital in those early years of the railway as an industrial line. We're not actually able to walk along the true track bed at this stage of the harbour branch because these buildings, these flats have been built on top of it. It actually ran over there along the river about 50 feet away from us. There was only one engine that was allowed to work on the harbour branch, and that was number 3 Raidal, a little 240 Bagnall. That was the only one with a short enough fixed wheelbase to negotiate the tight curves along that little branch line. Right here is where the harbour branch passed underneath what was originally called Raidal Bridge or Trefechan Bridge, and the tracks went right under here and carried on along the riverbank. This bridge has another connection with the Vale of Rheidol Railway. Sir James Slumper, who engineered the railway when it was built, including the harbour branch, also designed this, and this was built in the 1880s to replace an older bridge which was damaged by a storm. So this is also a very close connection with James Slumper and the Vale of Rheidol Railway. Once passing underneath here, unfortunately, although it would have been quite impressive to see, we have no photos that we know about of a train actually on the harbour branch. Plenty of photographs of the track, but none of actual trains running along it. One might turn up, we don't know. We can see the harbour now in the background. That's our terminus. It's not very long, it's less than half a mile. Wagons had to be propelled along it by that little bagnall. Anything loaded with ore coming from the mines would be shunted into a set of no more than 3 wagons at Aberystwyth station, and then that bagnall would propel them along here with a flagman walking in front to clear the track and warn anybody that this train was coming, because the rails were sunk into the ground. They weren't standing up, so it was very much a tramway, if you like, running along here, which was all roads. Carts and road vehicles could come along as well, and right along there, which is where we're going to head now. We're on the original level again now. The ground has been raised and lowered all over the shop back there, but this is the original track level that we're on. Nearly there now. We've got a long sweeping curve around the gap, which was a cause of a Board of Trade inquiry in 1897 because the fishermen were protesting about a railway being laid right across the middle of the mooring area. But that was solved quite quickly, and the railway was started in January 1901. And here we have it. You'd hardly know it now, but here's the sweeping curve of the harbour branch going round the gap. There's the gap over there. There were early plans to build the railway along the wall and have a drawbridge actually crossing the gap to let the boats come in, but that was deemed too expensive, so the tracks were laid on what was effectively the beach around here, and it was later, this wall was built at a later date then to form more of a sea barrier. But the original rails were just sitting on the shingle with a very steep 1 in 25 gradient up onto the wharf over there, which is called Rovald Wharf. And that's where all the storehouses were for the different mining companies in the valley. They would store the ore there that came down on the railway until the ships that were chartered in from Germany and from Antwerp and Belgium as well to pick up the ore and take it off to be smelted. All that was produced in the valley was ore concentrates. That was bagged up, sent down on the trains, pushed down here, loaded into the warehouses, and then emptied quite just naked concentrate into the hold of the ship, and then off it goes to be smelted. There were no known casualties of people working or building the harbour branch, but there were 10 casualties that came as a direct result of some questionable practices that were carried out on it. And that was in 1925, when a ship was loaded with ore from Aberystwyth mine, which is up the railway, came down on the train, and it was loaded when it was pouring down with rain. And this caused this ore concentrate to turn into a sludge, essentially, that was free moving in the hold of the ship. And the ship, after leaving, was caught in a storm off Pembrokeshire, and the entire ship capsized because of this sludge just kind of moving from side to side, and it caused the whole ship to capsize, and all souls on board were lost. So that was as a direct result of some questionable practices. It does say in the rule book for the railway that all wagons had to be sheeted over while the ore was in transit, but we do know that that was not always done, and that did lead to the unhappy death of those people in 1925. Here is Rovald Wharf. This is where, for the first 30 years of the railway's existence, the rails went all the way down to the end there, and there was a crane at the end for assisting in the loading process. Rails were sunk into the ground and pretty much extended the entire length of the harbour here. Ships could draw in alongside, and people would simply barrow the ore concentrate and dump it over the edge into the holds of the ships. The main reason for the abandonment of the harbour branch was, as you might expect, when the mines closed shortly after the opening of the railway, there was very little use for it. The last mine closed in 1930, and interestingly enough, the harbour branch was lifted later the same year, so we can tell quite easily why that was done. It did survive into the Great Western period, but since the Great Western withdrew that engine, that little bagnal, the only one that could use the branch, in 1924, there was no engine that could actually travel on this railway for the last 6 years of it existing. So we can only assume that wagons would be horse-drawn up here. There was very little ore going out at that time. It's a bit of a mystery. However, we do know that by the end of 1930, the rails were gone, and this first part of the railway to be built was the first part to go. This is the safe harbour here. You can see why it was built on this side. The sea is just behind me on the other side of the promenade. We've got the mouth of the River Ystwyth coming out under the bridge there, and this is the way that all of those ships laden with ore from the Cwm Rheidol mines would have headed out to sea, thanks to the railway. You may wonder, why was all this ore from Cwm Rheidol going to Belgium? Well, what happened in the early years of the 20th century, the Belgian smelting industry was flourishing, and what they did was start to buy up mines in the UK to supply the smelting industry in Belgium. The mine opposite Rovald, a Stimtien mine up on the Vale of Rheidol, that was a huge zinc producer, and zinc had a very high value at this time. So they bought a Stimtien mine and a bunch of others around the Vale of Rheidol Railway. So the railway probably supplied more ore to Belgium than it ever did for the rest of the UK, which is quite an interesting dynamic, really, because of the time. Hopefully in the next month or two there'll be my new book coming out on the mines, the history of the mines in Cwm Rheidol, and that has a lot more information on where the ore was going, how it was gotten out of the ground, and how the railway played into that. So keep an eye out for the new book. It's called Rich Mountains of Lead, and it follows the story of the ore from the mines to those smelteries via the railway. And furthermore, we'll have a book exclusively on the history of the railway and its connection with the mines coming out around Christmas time, hopefully, as well. So there's two things to keep an eye out there for. In the meantime, we'll see you again in the next one. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you soon.